Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today because we have some very exciting General Hospital news to talk about, and it's definitely worth the wait. Nina had already lived through too many humiliations caused by Willow, but this time the fear was different. It was no longer the fear of scandal, heartbreak, or another bitter family fight. It was the fear that her daughter had crossed into a darkness with no bottom. When Willow finally let the truth slip, Nina could no longer hide behind excuses or call it confusion, grief, or emotional collapse. She understood with a cold clarity that shook her to the core that Drew had not become trapped in that broken condition by accident. What the whole world believed was a medical tragedy was actually the result of Willow's cruelty, panic, and desperation. In that moment, Nina saw something in her daughter that frightened her more than any enemy ever had. Willow was no longer simply unstable. She was dangerous, calculating, and far too far gone to stop on her own. At first, Nina's shock came with the desperate instinct of a mother who still wanted to save her child from complete destruction. She listened as Willow tried to justify every horrifying step that had brought them here. Drew had ruined her life, Willow believed. Drew had become a threat. Drew wanted control, wanted revenge, wanted to take more away from her. In Willow's mind, that made every terrible choice feel necessary. But to Nina, the excuses only made the truth uglier. Willow was not confessing with remorse. She was confessing like someone who had already made peace with her own cruelty. That was what unsettled Nina the most. There was no true guilt in Willow, only fear of consequences and a frantic desire to keep the lie alive. As Nina stood near Drew and looked at his still body in the wheelchair, the full shape of the nightmare began to reveal itself. Drew was not truly gone. He was still alive, still present somewhere behind those damaged eyes, still capable of becoming the one witness who could destroy both of them. If Drew ever came back enough to speak, if even one fragment of memory returned clearly, then the secret would explode. Willow would face prison. Nina herself could be dragged down with her, whether for helping, hiding the truth, or failing to stop what she now knew. The walls began to close in around her. This was no longer only Willow's crime. By learning it and hesitating, Nina was already being pulled into it. That was when Nina made the kind of decision that does not arrive with screaming or chaos, but with a terrible quiet. It formed inside her like ice. She began to understand that Drew's continued survival was the greatest danger of all. A living Drew was a ticking clock. A living Drew meant uncertainty, exposure, police questions, courtrooms, shame, and the final destruction of whatever remained of her family. Nina hated herself for even letting the thought take shape, yet once it appeared, she could not force it away. If Drew died in his current condition, many people would mourn, but the truth might die with him. If Drew recovered even slightly, everything could be lost. That brutal logic became the poison in Nina's mind, and once it entered her, it spread fast. There was something especially tragic in the way Nina moved toward this decision, because part of her still believed she was acting out of love. Not moral love, not healthy love, but the twisted, frightened love of a mother who believed she was standing between her daughter and total ruin. Nina had spent so much time cleaning up Willow's messes, forgiving Willow's betrayals, and hoping for some miracle of healing that she no longer knew where protection ended and destruction began. She told herself she was being forced into an impossible corner. She told herself Willow had already gone mad, and that madness had now touched everyone around her. She told herself that if one life had to end to stop many lives from collapsing, then perhaps that was the cruel price fate had laid before her. These were not noble thoughts. They were the thoughts of a woman breaking under pressure and trying to dress horror in the language of sacrifice. The situation became even more unbearable because Willow could not continue controlling Drew's condition on her own. The daily medication was no small detail. It was the chain holding the entire lie together. Willow had to keep Drew in that half-living state, unable to expose her, unable to fight back, unable to return as the man who might tell the world what she had done. But Willow's life outside that room was becoming harder to manage. Washington was calling, demands were rising, Sidwell's influence hung over everything like a shadow. Willow could not keep running in two directions forever. So the question of who would take over Drew's care stopped being practical and became deadly. Once Nina was drawn into that role, she was no longer just a horrified mother learning a secret. She was becoming an active part of the machinery keeping Drew trapped. And that was where Nina's fatal mistake began to grow. Taking charge of Drew's medication may have seemed on the surface like an act of control. She may have believed that if she handled it herself, she could keep Willow from making things worse. She may even have convinced herself that she was creating order inside chaos. But in truth, the moment Nina's hands touched that responsibility, she stepped over a line that could never be uncrossed. Every pill, every dose, every silent visit to Drew became another piece of evidence against her soul. The more she tried to manage the danger, the more deeply she buried herself in it. And underneath that careful routine, another thought kept pulsing. If one wrong dose could end all of this, would that really be a mistake, or would it be a choice? That question changed Nina from a frightened observer into a woman capable of something unthinkable. Drew's weakness, his silence, and his helplessness made the situation even darker because he could not defend himself against the people deciding his fate. He had become less a person in their minds and more a problem to be managed. That is often how true moral collapse happens. It does not begin with open hatred. It begins when someone reduces another human being to an obstacle. Nina could feel herself slipping into that cold mindset. Instead of seeing Drew as a wounded man, she began to see him as the last loose end, the last witness, the last threat. Once that shift took hold, murder no longer looked like a wild act of rage. It began to look, in Nina's tortured thinking, like the final terrible solution. What makes this story so gripping is that Nina would not carry out such a plan with cruelty on her face. She would do it with trembling hands, sleepless nights, and a heart full of terror. That is what makes her descent more disturbing than simple villainy. Nina would know she was committing an unforgivable act, yet still move toward it because fear had outweighed conscience. She would tell herself Drew was already almost gone. She would tell herself Willow could never survive prison. She would tell herself that one death now might prevent a wider catastrophe later, but those are the lies desperate people tell themselves when they are about to destroy what little goodness remains in them. At the center of all this is Willow's influence, because Nina would never have reached this point without the emotional violence of watching her daughter become someone almost unrecognizable. Willow's madness does not just ruin lives directly, it infects the people around her. It drags them into choices they once would have judged as monstrous. Nina is not innocent, but she is also not acting in a vacuum. She is reacting to the unbearable realization that Willow has become evil without limits, and that every hour Drew stays alive increases the chance that the truth will burst open. In Nina's mind, there is no safe path left. There is only the choice between losing her daughter to prison or losing herself to sin. That is the kind of cruel emotional trap that can push a broken woman into shocking territory. If Nina goes through with this plot, the tragedy will not end with Drew's death. It will only deepen, because murder does not solve madness, it does not restore peace, it does not heal Willow. In fact, it would likely seal Willow's darkness forever, because once Nina kills for her, Willow will learn the most poisonous lesson of all, that even the worst acts can be covered up if someone loves others enough to do the dirty work. Nina may think she is saving her daughter, but she would really be helping Willow become even more untouchable, even more corrupt, and even more convinced that human life is something she can manipulate to protect herself. That is why Nina's possible mistake with Drew's medication feels bigger than a simple accident. It carries the weight of intent, temptation, and moral collapse. Whether she gives the wrong dose by panic, by confusion, or by secret design, the result could be the same. Drew could die under her watch, and Nina would have to live with the knowledge that somewhere deep inside, part of her may have wanted exactly that. For a woman who once fought so hard to hold on to family, love, and redemption, that would be the cruelest fall of all. She would not just be covering up Willow's crime anymore. She would be creating a new one with her own hands. In the end, this possible turn in the story is so powerful because it forces Nina into the ugliest truth of motherhood. Love without limits can become poison. Protection without morality can become violence. And fear, when it grows too large, can make even a woman who knows better begin to think like a killer. Nina may believe she is acting to save Willow from prison and herself from disgrace, but the cost would be unbearable. If Drew dies because Nina decides that silence is safer than justice, then the real tragedy will not only be the loss of Drew, it will be the final proof that Willow's madness has already claimed another victim by turning Nina into the very thing she once feared most. Nina may be standing at the edge of one of the darkest choices of her life. And what makes this story so powerful is that it does not need a cruel villain at the center of it. It only needs a frightened mother, a shattered daughter, and a helpless man whose future now depends on the judgment of someone who never wanted this burden in the first place. When Willow confesses the truth, Nina is not simply shocked because a secret has been exposed. She is shaken because the confession forces her to see how far Willow has fallen. This is no longer a matter of bad choices, emotional instability, or selfish behavior. This is something far more disturbing. Willow has crossed into a place where another person's life can be controlled, damaged, and reduced to silence, all in the name of protecting herself. For Nina, that realization would feel like a deep personal wound, because it means the daughter she still wants to believe in may already be far beyond reason. What makes Nina's reaction so important is that she is not Willow. She does not have Willow's coldness, and she does not carry the same willingness to destroy someone without looking back. Nina has made mistakes, and she has spent years in emotional storms of her own, but that painful history may be exactly why this situation hits her so hard. She knows what it means to feel powerless. She knows what it means to lose pieces of a life and watch control slip away. That is why Drew's condition may affect her in a much deeper way than Willow expects. Instead of seeing him only as a threat, Nina may see a man trapped inside his own suffering, a man losing his voice, his strength, and his dignity day by day. That kind of recognition could create a terrible conflict inside her, because every ounce of compassion she feels for Drew would pull against the pressure Willow places on her. The most painful part of this possible story is that Nina may agree to help not because she wants Drew harmed, but because she is emotionally cornered. Willow's request would not be a simple favor. It would be a test of Nina's loyalty, her fear, and her weakness. If Nina refuses, she risks turning against her daughter at the exact moment Willow is unraveling. If she agrees, she steps into a nightmare that could destroy her conscience. That is what gives this storyline its emotional weight. Nina's not choosing between right and wrong in a clean, simple way. She is choosing between two different forms of loss. On one side is the possibility of betraying Willow. On the other is the possibility of betraying herself. For a woman already carrying years of regret and instability, that is not a small burden. It is the kind of burden that can break a person quietly from the inside out.